Hey there, y'all. Peter Barclay here. Welcome back to True North Sports Talk Podcast. And holy smokes, we have an absolutely packed show for you today. If you've been paying attention at all to the world of sports this week, you know this has been quite the week. It's been crazy insane. We're talking about blockbuster trades, massive signings, and some of the wildest moves we've seen all off-season and all season long. And this episode, we might end up running longer than we normally do, just simply because there are so many things to cover. We're going to start out with the Blue Jays and one of the biggest contracts in franchise history with Dylan Cease. They signed him 7 years, $210. The biggest free agent contract in team history in terms of likely annual average value. And it's only bigger than Vladdy's simply because Vladdy's is for like 7 more years. So we'll break down what that means for the Blue Jays, what their championship aspirations might be going forward. Then we'll talk about the NHL, where just on December 12th, so a couple days ago, just everything just blew up and went crazy. Quinn Hughes, yes, the Norris Trophy winning defenseman, got dealt to Minnesota. And then we'll talk about Edmonton and Tristan Jarry. Edmonton made a couple of trades that day. And then we'll finish up talking about things that came out of the winter meetings in Orlando. You got Pete Alonso, Edwin Díaz, Kyle Schwarber, the Mets fan base that is just disgusted by their off-season. And yeah, so as always, I have my cup. Hopefully you have yours. And let's dive right into it. So we have the Blue Jays. And what did they do? Well, they started their off-season off, most Blue Jays fans would say, on the right foot. November 26th, they shocked a lot of people in the baseball world by signing Dylan Cease to a 7-year, $210 million contract. And let's just let that sink in for a second. 7 years, $210 million for a starting pitcher. This is, as we said, annual average value, probably the largest contract the Blue Jays have ever given out. It's bigger than George Springer's. It's bigger than Jose Barrios, bigger than Kevin Gausman, or even going back to Hyun-Jin Ryu. And now, before we get into the details about all of that, and why this is a big deal for the Blue Jays, let's find out a little bit about who we even brought in to the franchise. Now, Dylan Cease, 29 years old, about to turn 30, so he'll be 37 when the contract runs out. He's been one of the most durable, high strikeout pitchers in baseball over the last 5 years. Since 2021, no starting pitcher in Major League Baseball has more strikeouts than Dylan Cease. Granted, that's likely only because Paul Skeens hadn't made it to the majors until 2-3 years ago, so he's had a longer time to rack that up. But not even Garrett Cole or Corbin Burns, Tarek Skubal, Shohei Ohtani, none of those guys have had more strikeouts. He's had 1,106 strikeouts in that amount of time. He's made at least 32 starts in each of the past 5 years, which is exactly what the Blue Jays want, durability. And that just speaks to the fact that they're looking maybe to fill or supplement guys like Jose Barrios, who in 10 years hadn't missed a start at all until this year. And so yeah, you're looking for that durability. They've always had priorities for Gausman, Barrios, Bassett in recent years, and Cease really fits that type of pitcher very perfectly. Now, I know what you might be thinking, and a lot of us around the Blue Jays had that same thought. Didn't Dylan Cease have a rough 2025? Well, yeah, he went 8-12. He had a 4.55 ERA, which is still better than some pitchers that we've heard of this season in the majors. And that's not great. But, and this is the important part, his peripherals, so like the surrounding stats that aren't ERA, they were still really strong. He struck out 215 batters in just 168 innings. That's a pretty good number. His FIP was 356, which suggests that he was much better than his ERA indicated. And he had a ridiculous 33.4 whiff rate, which led all qualified pitchers, which meant even if he had that 4.55 ERA, there may have been errors behind him, catches that weren't made in the field, plays that weren't made the way they should have been. So there's a lot that can kind of skew the ERA a bit. Maybe it was bullpen guys coming in behind him that weren't able to make outs, and so runs were charged to him when he wasn't even in the game, but he's still responsible for those runs, don't get me wrong. But if a strong bullpen is behind him, maybe a point or two ticks off of that ERA, like not the ones, but like in the, so maybe he's a 4.05 instead of a 4.55. Right, so it just really depends. But that whiff rate, that swing and miss rate is unbelievable. And that's really, really, really what the Blue Jays were hoping for. Also, the Blue Jays have what has become over the years a secret weapon that's not so secret. And that is Pete Walker. He has proven over the years as their pitching coach that he can take veteran starters, he can take rookie starters, and he can elevate their performance. Look at Gausman, for example. Had a Cy Young caliber season in 2023. They think, as they should, that Cease can do the same. You look at other starters that under Pete Walker had career years. As soon as they went to other organizations, all of a sudden, they weren't quite what they used to be. And so just think of some names over the years where that's happened. So contract specifics. Let's get into it a little bit. $210 million, 7 years. As we said, that's about $30 million per season. But here's the kicker. And this is something that I noticed right away too. There are actually, and this is probably a first for the Blue Jays, but they have sort of, in a way, followed the Dodgers a bit in the fact that there are deferrals in this contract between $8 to $10 million per year. So the actual present day value for each year is closer to $26-25 million, somewhere in there. And that's a lot easier to manage and gives them more room for a Bo Bichette. Maybe that even gives them room to do Kyle Tucker too. Who knows? And so that's the thing, is they really, really did well on this. So after the contract runs out, so between 2033 and 2046, they're going to pay him about $63 million. Now, that's not quite Shohei money, but it just goes to show that they were willing to try something different to strengthen this team over the long term. Also, part of his contract was a limited no-trade clause, so there are about 8 teams on that list that he can block trades to. Obviously, we know most contracts have performance bonuses, and so $150,000 for winning the Cy Young, $50,000 for making the All-Star team, that kind of deal. And why did the Blue Jays do this? Well, context is everything. They're coming off a season in 2025 where they won the American League, they represented them in the World Series, and they came maybe 3 or 4 different plays from winning the World Series. They went to Game 7, they went to the 11th inning, and it was heartbreaking the way that they were able to lose. They were this close, just a hair away from being 3-time world champions. So here's the problem. And I don't really think it's as much of a problem as some might make it out to be. But at least on the pitching side, and maybe 1 or 2 on the player side, this window that they've been working in is starting to wind down a bit. After next season, Kevin Gausman's a free agent. He's also a year older. Shane Bieber, who they acquired at the deadline and exercised his $6 million player option, he's going to want to re-up. Will they be able to keep him around? And at what cost is he going to look at? $16 million, I'd say we got a hometown discount on that, at least for this year. And so he'll be a free agent. Barrios has an opt-out after the 2026 season. So we'll see if he chooses to leave. Now, depending on the type of season he has, or if he gets traded before then, that may be another hole to fill. And so they're going to have some heavy lifting to do next offseason just to get back to where they feel they are right now with their pitching staff. Now, one of the guys we're going to talk about a little bit later on, depending on how this season goes for him, depending on how Bowden Francis bounces back, and where Ricky Tiedemann gets to this season, if he can even stay healthy, which has become a question with him. And he kind of reminds me of... There was a pitcher back in the days of Ricky Romero. He had all this tantalizing stuff, but he just couldn't keep himself healthy long enough to realize his potential. I was reminded recently of Tiedemann, how he shot through the system far quicker than even Trey Savage. He had the same type of electric strikeout stuff, pitching in the high 90s even, until he started getting injured all the time. So we also have to see if Trey Savage has a good full year at the major league level, or if there's more work to be done there. Keep in mind they have Eric Lauer in their bullpen still, provided they work out arbitration. So there's another starting option if you need to. And so that's the thing. They can potentially, not that I'm saying this is going to happen, but Bassett's still out there that they could work in as a backup. Keep him in the bullpen, keep him stretched out, and he could step in anytime you need him to. You could have, if you really wanted to go crazy, you could go throw some money at Max Scherzer as well, and just keep someone like a Yesavage and a Francis at AAA as a backup plan for your rotation. So hopefully we need to have a Dylan Cease locked up to build around going forward, and it helps them to secure the future. So if Gausman and Bieber walk, they'll have Cease and Yesavage. Potentially they'll have Barrios if he chooses to stay. So this is a win now and a win later move if you're the Blue Jays. They are trying to capitalize on their World Series momentum and catapult that into long-term stability, which as a front office, that's what you're looking to do. The other thing I pointed out to a friend the other day is that a lot of the moves, other than I think one trade they made, they haven't touched their prospects as yet. And that's a big thing for this Blue Jays team because their farm system still needs a lot of work. Now they also have a couple of Rule 5 picks that they made. One who was injured all of last year, so they're going to have to keep him on the roster. And then one they made this year. And so we'll see. Really, this deal though for Dylan Cease, something that I love to see, the fan base loves to see. 7 years is a bit risky for a 30-year-old pitcher, but he'll only be 37 when he's done. And lots of pitchers, a la Scherzer, Verlander, Jamie Moyer is an example, Randy Johnson is an example, Roger Clemens is an example. There's many examples of pitchers being effective up until they're 40. So, yes, it's a bit risky. Yes, the injuries could mount unless they manage his innings if they notice something going on there. And the long and the short of it is, playing it safe gets you in Cincinnati and Oakland territory where you just don't win. If you look at a team like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Red Sox, historically, the teams that are willing to take the most chances and risk it all, they're the ones who win. And this year, so far, it's looking like the Blue Jays are all in. To me, there's still a lot of work to do because they have to get a deal done with Bo Bichette. To me, that's a must. His position on the field at shortstop and having Jimenez at second base, that's far more important than outfield. We have a ton of capable outfielders that gave us like these crazy important good at bats in the most important times of the year. You got Lucas out there. You got Barger out there when necessary. You got Schneider in left. You can put Lucas in left. You're going to have Santander back that you may have to put him in the field. You got Springer who can play the field, but he's looking more like a DH than an outfielder these days. And so we haven't even mentioned Miles Straw yet. You have all these outfielders. Why do you need Kyle Tucker? Because all of those outfielders I just mentioned, with the exception of maybe Davis Schneider, and I would definitely take Santander out of that, but Schneider's getting better too. I would say most of your outfield is Gold Glove caliber. Whether they've won them or not's another question. They have some good competition. But at the same time, I would say your outfield isn't necessarily your issue right now. You need to keep your infield strong. If you can put Barger, Bichette, Jimenez, and Vladdy around your infield most of the time, and we haven't even factored in Ernie Clement yet, who I would say could be your everyday third baseman, unless you move him to second on the odd day. But like, you have all these guys that you need in the field every single day. And so I just don't believe that Kyle Tucker really fits what they need right now. Granted, his bat is enormous when it's on and when it's going well. But the fact of the matter is, Bichette, if he wasn't injured, would lead the league in hits every single year. He has that track record. So you want that on your team. You want him healthy. And so that's a big decision. I would say Bichette may even command less money than Kyle Tucker, and you're getting a better player. So is that not worth it to save that bit of extra money for pitching down the road that you might need? Time will tell. And on that note, let me know in the comments, guys, what do you think is the better move, Bichette or Tucker? Let me know what you think. So, getting back to our pitching here, right now, as it stands today, their rotation is absolutely loaded. They have Cease, Gausman, and Bieber. That's a scary series if you're an opposing team. You don't get even a nanosecond off with those three guys. And then throw in, for good measure, you might have to face Barrios and Yasevich, or Cody Ponce. Who knows? Maybe Bowden Francis bounces back to what we had 2 years ago. You're looking 7-8 starting pitchers deep. We haven't even mentioned Eric Lauer could start and what he did last year midsummer with a sub-3 ERA. So you got arguably, and I would make a very strong case that you have the best rotation in all of baseball, at least on paper. And you gotta, everything comes down to the games being played, the execution on the field, right? But that's a pretty scary thought. And you add to that what they've done with their bullpen in the offseason. They've added 2 more pitchers this week. You have Varlin, you got Fisher, you got Fluharty, you got Jimmy Garcia coming back. And if he can get to where he was when he got injured last year, you got Jeff Hoffman in the back end. And the 2 guys we're going to talk about later on, so I don't want to give too much away. But you get Brandon Little out of that bullpen, I hope. You're going to have Eric Lauer potentially in that bullpen. Bowden Francis potentially in that bullpen. Who knows, even Cody Ponce might start out in that bullpen. That's a pretty crazy looking bullpen right now. So, this team, it is super duper built to compete right now. The question is right now, will it be enough? The Dodgers, obviously by the fact that they came out on the right end of that hair, are still the team to beat. The Yankees are going to be dangerous. They've made some subtle moves there. But the Blue Jays, they're making what they perceive and what most of the fan base perceives, so far at least, all the right moves. They still have a few that they have to get done. As I mentioned, you got to get one or the other, a Bichette or Tucker. And who knows, maybe there's another pitching move to make or something that we haven't even seen yet that they are willing to do. Maybe there's a trade on tap that we haven't figured out yet. Who knows what Ross and Shapiro are up to. We haven't even mentioned the fact that this offseason Mark Shapiro got a new 5-year deal from the team. That's a whole nother podcast for another day. But it's looking like the Jays are having one of the best off seasons they've had probably since 2015-2016. So some of the other moves that the Blue Jays made, because Cease wasn't the only one, they've been a busy team. So before they had officially announced and finalized the Dylan Cease deal based on the medical stuff as usual, the Jays had agreed to a 3-year $30 million, so that's $10 a year, that's manageable very easily, contract with Cody Ponce. This was officially announced around the 11th. And now Ponce, he's an interesting story. He's 31 years old, so he's not a baby by any stretch. He hasn't pitched in the majors, so he last pitched in 2021. And he had a bit of a rough go of it with Pittsburgh. He had a 7.04 ERA. And you might imagine, why would the Blue Jays go after someone like that and give them $30 million? Well, this strikes as kind of like a shot in the dark like Yariel Rodriguez was. Ponce was pitching in the Korean Baseball Organization, or the KBO. he went 17-1. He had a 1.89 ERA and won the KBO MVP. He struck out 252 batters in 180 innings. Now, if that number sounds familiar, that's pretty close to what Dylan Cease did at the major league level. So again, that's elite production. Question now, and this is the big one on everyone's mind, will that translate at the major league level, or will he potentially struggle the way Yariel Rodriguez did? At this point in time, we don't know. The KBO is a step below the major leagues in terms of talent, but the Blue Jays clearly see something they like, and at $10 million per year, it's a reasonable gamble for back-end rotation, perhaps bullpen depth if they need it. And the other thing worth mentioning here about Cody Ponce is in that season in 2021 where he had the 7.04 ERA with Pittsburgh, his fastball was only coming in at about 92, maybe 93 miles per hour. Now, in the KBO last year, he was more in the 95 to 98 mile per hour range. So his fastball, he was actually throwing it harder last year than he's ever done before. So that might assist him in the fact that he could be more effective against major league hitters now. And I think that's the key difference that the Jays saw and were willing to take a chance on. So, then on Friday, that day of unreal movement, the Blue Jays signed reliever Tyler Rogers to a 3-year, $37 million contract. This deal includes an $11 million vesting option for 2029, and that is if Rogers pitches in either 110 games over the 27-28 or 60 games in 2028. So that's some incentive for him to do really well. Rogers is one of the most unique pitchers in baseball. He basically is a submariner. He's 34 years old, and he's been incredibly effective for the Giants over the years. Soft-tossing relievers like Rogers don't typically get 3-year contracts, especially at age 34. But the Blue Jays believe in that unconventional delivery, and as I mentioned to someone in my circle, that this is kind of like Adam Simmer but better. And I've already seen over the last couple days, there's been multiple people that took a look at his delivery and the next guy we're going to talk about's delivery and went, could you imagine them pitching right after Trey Yesavage? You got over the top in Yesavage, and then you're coming up underneath with these two guys. So that would just, to most hitters, it's like, wait, where do I look for this ball now? As it's coming from two more or less opposite places that it's coming from. Last year, Rogers was able to post a 2.07 ERA in 61 innings. His sinker, which is basically his fastball, only averages 85, but it's deceptive based on the arm angle, and hitters sometimes do struggle to pick up the ball out of his hand, which leads to weaker contact, and he is a ground ball pitcher. So the Blue Jays are betting on this unique skill set that makes him less susceptible to the typical aging curve for most relievers. It's a bold bet. Ross Atkins is betting on 3 of a kind here, and they're hoping they've got a reliable late inning weapon for the next 3 years. And remember, the Blue Jays were one of the most aggressive teams in the high leverage reliever market this offseason. They were linked to, but I think it was just all smoke, but they were linked to Devin Williams, Edwin Díaz, and Robert Suarez before they ultimately went with Mr. Rogers. One more thing, the Blue Jays also acquired Chase Lee from the Detroit Tigers in a trade, and this is what I mentioned earlier, the only guy that they got by using any sort of prospect capital. But if you hear the name of the prospect, you're like, huh? Who's that guy? So it's not like they traded a Tiedemann or someone big name like that to get him. He's young, and he basically had 1 year of service time last year with the Tigers. He's hard throwing. He's a righty. Maybe not a big name, but he adds a lot of depth to your bullpen. And again, he's got a funky delivery that if you throw him out there behind a guy like Savage, as a hitter, you're going, wait a second, where's this ball coming from all of a sudden? You've been so focused on over the top, and now it's coming up from underneath, and you're just like, how am I supposed to hit this thing? So, the Blue Jays, over the offseason so far, have added Cease, Ponce, Rogers, and Lee. So they're loaded up on the pitching side, hopefully for another World Series run. And as a fan, you gotta love that kind of aggression. And the fact that they shouldn't be done yet. There's a lot of lifting left to do. As I mentioned, you got the case with Tucker, Bichette. Maybe there's another small tweak or two here. And yeah, you're looking at another good offseason, another hopefully long run into the playoffs, and hopefully you've done enough to keep up with the likes of the Red Sox, the Yankees, Tampa Bay going back into Tropicana Field next year with its renovations. That's going to be a tougher place to play than at George Steinbrenner this year. And they've made a move or two more subtly, as you might imagine. And so it's going to be an interesting season this year. I mean, Baltimore made an interesting splash. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So we'll see how this all works out. I mean, the biggest, I think with Baltimore, the biggest question mark is going to be how do they do on the pitching side? Their pitching seems to be decimated even as we stand right now. They haven't done a whole lot this offseason. So we'll see how that bounces back next year. Alright, so we're going to switch gears to hockey for a few minutes and then go back to baseball. There were some ginormous trades made on Friday, or Thursday rather, that really changed the way the NHL looks. So, first off, you had Minnesota acquiring Quinn Hughes from the Vancouver Canucks, and they gave up Marco Rossi, defenseman Zeev Buim, winger Liam Ogren, and a 2026 first round pick. This is a massive trade, to put it nicely. Like, it's legitimately one of the biggest deals that we have seen in a very long time. Maybe even since, I don't know, Erik Karlsson left Ottawa. Something like that. It's been a long time. And so let's find out why. Quinn Hughes is only 26 years old. He's a Norris Trophy winning defenseman. He's one of the best defensemen in the NHL. He recorded 92 points with 17 goals, 75 assists. He played all 82 games last year, which is the kind of durability that you want. And he's widely considered to be the second best defenseman in the league, behind only Cale Makar of the Colorado Avalanche. Now, there's some other guys out there that if they heard me say that, they might take umbrage with it. But that's the perception of a lot of fans of the NHL. Hughes was also the captain of the Canucks, or should I say was, because Vancouver just started to blow it all up, really. You could see Elias Peterson maybe being available now that this happened. And it just doesn't look good in Vancouver right now. Since the days of the Twins and of Roberto Luongo being there, it just has gone so far downhill that it's almost scary to be a Vancouver Canucks fan right now. I know my friend that lives out there on that side of the country, he's just... You constantly see him going, geez, what are we doing here, guys? We need to do something. And it just, yeah, like I get where he's coming from, because that's just a disappointing team over the last 5 to 10 years. So what happened? Why would the Canucks trade arguably their best player? I mean, Peterson might have something to say about that, but he was their captain, their 26-year-old franchise cornerstone. Well, simply it seems like they're tanking. Vancouver's in last place in the NHL right now. They're 11-17-3. And I mean, I just looked at that this morning. I mean, they really are a terrible team this year. They're minus 24 in goal differential, which means they're really, really, really bad. They've missed the playoffs for the last few years. They started 25-26 this badly. And management decided, well, maybe it's time we made some monumental changes to this thing. But here's the thing. Hughes is signed through the 26-27 season at about $7.85 per year, like the cap hit. He's got no trade protection in his contract. And there's been speculation for a while now that he wouldn't have re-signed with Vancouver when his deal expired. Hughes has openly talked about wanting to play with his two younger brothers, Jack and Luke, and they're both with the New Jersey Devils. So for Minnesota, this could actually just be a bit of a rental. So the Canucks faced a choice. Plain and simple. Either hold on to him, and you could lose him for nothing, or you trade him now and get the best return possible so that you don't walk away empty-handed. And they chose option 2. They wanted to make sure that they got the most possible they could back for this guy. And that's where Minnesota came in with an offer. And Vancouver went, well, look at these guys we're getting back. We can't refuse this. So what did the Canucks get back? Well, they got Marco Rossi, a 24-year-old center who posted 60 points last season for the Wild. That's not terrible in today's NHL. He's a bit undersized, but he's incredibly skilled. He signed for almost the same amount of time, the 27-28 season. He's a very reasonable $5 million cap hit, and he was the 9th overall pick 5 years ago. Zeev Buim is a 20-year-old defenseman. He was the 12th overall pick last year in 2024. And he's already playing in the NHL. He's showing quite a few flashes of offensive upside. So far in 31 games as a rookie, he's got 13 points. That's pretty solid. And the Canucks are hoping that he can continue developing into the type of defenseman that Quinn Hughes was, except he's way younger. And perhaps he could replace at least some of the offensive production from the blue line. Liam Ogren is a 21-year-old winger. He's a former first-round pick. He's got size and skill, and Vancouver is betting that he continues to develop as well. Then there's the 2026 first-round pick. And if the Wild make a deep playoff run, which is the goal after acquiring Hughes, that pick will be in the 20s. But it's still a first rounder, and that's still very valuable. So the Canucks got 3 young former first round picks plus another first round pick. And that's a solid return for a player with 18 months left on his deal. So, what is the Wild's perspective in all of this? Well, Minnesota seems to be going all in. They signed Kirill Kaprizov to the richest contract in NHL history this summer. They've been a good team for years, but have lost 9 straight playoff series since 2015. They haven't advanced past the first round in over a decade, and Bill Guerin, the Wild's GM, is clearly tired of getting bounced early. So, he made, so far, the boldest move in franchise history, trading 4 assets, including 3 roster players, for a superstar defenseman in his prime. Hughes gives the Wild a legitimate and immediate game changer on the back end. He'll likely pair with Brock Faber, and Brock Faber is more of a stay-at-home, shut-down, strong defenseman. He basically makes up for any of, he doesn't have the offensive upside, but he's the kind of defenseman that you pair with a Hughes so that if he's pinching or gets caught, you have that stay-at-home guy with him. And together, they could make a top 5 pairing in the NHL. What's the Wild's problem in all this, though? Hughes can't be extended until July 1st, and it's unclear if he'll want to stay in Minnesota long term. Because keep in mind, he's talked about wanting to play with his brothers, who are both in New Jersey. Could Minnesota talk them, Hughes, into getting his brothers to come there, maybe? It's hard to say. The Devils reportedly made an offer for Hughes, but they couldn't match what Minnesota gave up. So, the Wild are taking a huge risk. They gave up 3 young players and a first-round pick for a year and a half of having Hughes on their team, and if he walks in free agency at the end of 2027, this could go down as one of the worst trades in franchise history. If they're able to win a cup with Hughes there, well, that'll change things, and fans will see it as all being worth it, sort of like when the Toronto Raptors traded DeMar DeRozan for Kawhi Leonard. DeRozan was a wildly popular player in Toronto, but all was pretty well forgotten when Kawhi took them to the championship. Bitter pill when he left, don't get me wrong, but it could be a similar thing if Hughes brings Minnesota that far. Granted, looking at the team that he's playing on, that's a lot less likely than where the Raptors were at. So if you're in Minnesota as a fan, don't necessarily hold your breath. I respect the aggression. The Wild are in a win-now window with Kaprizov. And like the Jays, in a lot of senses, you can't be timid right now. You have to go for it, because hesitation will make you lose. The losers here, well, that would be the Canucks fan base. Hughes was a beloved player, he was the captain, and now he's gone. Fans could be devastated by that. However, if Rossi and Boehm develop into stars, then this trade will look a lot better in a few years. Right now in Vancouver, they're just asking and begging for patience from their fan base, even though it's been too long already. But this is the story in the NHL right now, and we'll be watching it closely over the next year or two to see how it works out. However, there were 2 other gigantic trades that day. And for me, this was actually a bigger trade than the last one. Simply because, as much as on the podcast I try and be as objective as possible, bring you the truth no matter how much it hurts, every commentator, doesn't matter who it is, secretly has a team. And this one involved mine. Now, objectively, for years now, I've been saying that Pittsburgh needs to trade Tristan Jarry. They need upgrade at the goaltending position. I've been open about the fact that I was extremely upset with the team when they hired Kyle Dubas after watching what he did to the Maple Leafs and just knowing where he was at the end of that time. I was very concerned that he was going to really pull the Pittsburgh Penguins down a notch and waste the last few years of the Malkin, Crosby, Letang era. So far, Kyle Dubas has proved me right. And this move could be just one more notch in that belt of proving me right. I know Tristan Jarry may have felt his time was winding down in Pittsburgh, but this isn't the move that Pittsburgh should have made. They traded Tristan Jarry and forward Samuel Poulin to the Edmonton Oilers in exchange for Stuart Skinner and defenseman Brett Kulak. Now the big get for Pittsburgh in this trade is actually Brett Kulak. They also got a 2029 second round pick, and so this is more or less a goaltending swap. The Oilers have struggled in net all season. I remember right from the beginning of the year, I was saying that Stuart Skinner was the biggest issue that the Edmonton Oilers had. Turns out there were a whole bunch more of them because they've been playing like garbage in front of them. So it's not entirely his fault, but there are times when you need your goalie to bail you out, and Skinner just wasn't up to the task, which is the real concern I have for the Pittsburgh Penguins team, who is getting him. He's been good at times, but at other times, he's looked like a sieve with giant holes in it because everything gets through him. Now, playoff Stuart Skinner, well, if he shows up the way he has the last couple years in the playoffs and Pittsburgh makes it there, offsets maybe a little bit, but Pittsburgh isn't where they are without Tristan Jarry this year. Now, yeah, they need an upgrade, but Skinner is a step back, not an upgrade. So Jarry 30 has been an okay starter for Pittsburgh. He's signed through the 28-29 season at a 5.4 cap hit, and Jarry has had his own struggles both this season and in years past, so this isn't necessarily a slam dunk upgrade for Edmonton. But the Oilers are desperate right now, and if this is the only goalie that was available to them, well, it's likely an upgrade over Stuart Skinner, even if it's only marginal. They made it to the Stanley Cup final last year, lost in Game 7. They made it to the Stanley Cup final the year before that against the same team and lost. But with Connor McDavid, their championship window is the here and now, with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl still in their prime. If Jarry can stabilize their goaltending, and he looked really good against the Leafs last night, this trade could be the difference between a deep playoff run and either not making it or an early exit. And that's something that in Oiler country, you just can't do it. In a smaller move the same day, the Oilers also made acquiring defenseman Spencer Stastny from Nashville for a 2027 third round pick. And Stastny is basically a depth piece. He's another body that is good for them. Hopefully he'll help Jarry keep the puck out of the net. It also shows that Edmonton's all in on improving their roster because they really, really need to in order to get back where they were last year. In other NHL trades this week, St. Louis acquired Akil Thomas from the LA Kings for Nikita Alexandrov. That's a minor deal, but the Blues are open for business according to insiders around the league. So expect more moves from them as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline. The NHL trade market has been relatively quiet this season compared to in some of the past, with only 6 trades that have happened since opening night. But with March 6th coming, things are going to start heating up. Alright, so to finish out this, hopefully we'll get through it fairly quick because we're running towards the end of our time here. The winter meetings in Orlando. They wrapped up this week. With all the stuff the Blue Jays were doing, other teams were busy. It was a chaotic week. And so let's start with probably the 1 or 1A of the biggest signings. On December 11th, and this is where I said we'll mention the Baltimore thing later, Pete Alonso agreed to a 5-year, $155 million contract with the Baltimore Orioles. Now this is huge for a bunch of reasons. Baltimore hasn't given out a contract this big since Chris Davis, who, as it turns out, was also a first baseman. First, Alonso bet on himself last offseason, and it paid off big this time around. After a down 2024 season, Alonso signed a 1-year deal with the Mets that included an opt-out. He had a bounce-back season, hitting .272. He had 38 homers and 126 RBIs. He opted out, hit free agency, and he got the contract he was looking for. Secondly, the Orioles have been searching for a big-name free agent for years. They were finalists for Kyle Schwarber before he signed his contract, and we'll talk about that a bit later. They've been linked to Kyle Tucker, which he would probably fit their mold better than the Blue Jays, just simply because they traded Cedric Mullins at the deadline last year. And they have finally landed their guy in Pete Alonso. Baltimore needed an upgrade at first base. Ryan Mountcastle's been okay, but he's not the difference maker that Alonso could be. Alonso is a 30 home run threat every single year, and we've been watching that his whole career in New York. He brings power, leadership, and a veteran presence to a young Orioles team that, by all accounts, based on the year or two before that, they underperformed in 2025. The fit makes sense. Camden Yards is a hitter-friendly park. The Orioles can have, when their pitching is right, elite pitching. But again, they really had issues in that department last year. They just needed some more pop in their lineup to go along with Rutschman. And Alonso will definitely, if he's right, provide that. Now, he's 31 though. So is $155 million a lot for a 31-year-old? Yeah, it sure is. First basemen don't typically age well, but Alonso's defensive metrics were never great to begin with. But the Orioles are in a win-now window, and they can't afford to wait around. They had to make a splash, especially after the way last year went from the 2 years before that. From Alonso's perspective, he's going to what could be a contender, even though they definitely weren't last year. The Orioles have one of the best young cores in baseball. Gunnar Henderson, Adley Rutschman, Jackson Holliday. Add Alonso to that mix, well, that makes them a lot more difficult to play against. Are they a World Series threat yet? I don't think so. There's still a lot to do there. And again, I think it's all on the pitching side. Their back end of their bullpen was strong a couple years ago, but it's just not what it used to be. This signing signals that the Orioles really are serious. They want to compete. And for Orioles fans, that's a great look. They love it. The competition for the Blue Jays is there. So I love that, because the better competition you play against, if you're the best of that better competition, that just shows you where you're at. So that's the AL East is always a dogfight, and it's going to be no different this year. Kyle Schwarber, Edwin Díaz, all those things, let's talk about that. So while the Orioles were celebrating, the New York Mets were getting destroyed by their fan base, and they really deserve it. They went after Juan Soto last year, paid him a boatload of money. Thank you, New York, for saving the Blue Jays from themselves. But he was just dismal. Within weeks or a month of the season, there was questions about his work ethic, his leadership, his whininess. And as a Blue Jays fan, I was inwardly cheering, even though I like to be objective as much as I can, like I said. But that was a great move by us striking out on him. So, New York really took it on the chin, especially losing Edwin Díaz in the same breath as losing Pete Alonso. And they haven't done anything to get better. They also traded Nimmo to Texas and got back someone Blue Jays fans will remember in Marcus Semien. And so they really got a good piece back for Nimmo. Semien had a down year, but as Blue Jays fans know, he can knock it out of the park if the opportunity is there. So Kyle Schwarber, on December 10th, Schwarber agreed to, and we were going to get to this, a 5-year, $150 million deal to stay with the Phillies. That's $30 per. And for a 33-year-old DH, sometimes outfielder, that's a lot of money. Now, Schwarber's from Cincinnati. The Reds desperately needed left-handed power bat, and he would have been a perfect fit. But the Reds didn't even try to match the Phillies' offer. They let him stay. Reds fans, being the team they are, they're furious. The team is one bat away from going the way the Blue Jays did from last to first in their division. And yet they refused to say, hey, we'll give you 160. Same terms, same everything else. We'll just give you a bit more money. They didn't even try. And so understandably, Cincinnati's fan base is really upset with their team. I can relate, as there were times the Blue Jays did stuff like that years ago. Thankfully, up here north of the border, those things have changed now. But I get where they're coming from. One of the biggest stories, especially for Blue Jays fans, is Edwin Díaz. Now, they linked us to him. At the time, I was hearing he wanted over $100 million. To me, for a closer, and those can be hit or miss, I thought that was unrealistic. So December 10th, he signed 3 years, $69 million with the Los Angeles Dodgers. Now, let's repeat that. The Dodgers signed the Mets closer. And yeah, the Mets stunk, but they had one of the best in the business. He saved 40 games. He had a .297 ERA. And the Dodgers, fresh off back-to-back World Series titles. And Sasaki was their closer last year. Even though he's a starter, it was due to injury. They didn't really have a good closer. So now, they added an elite closer. And Sasaki will probably be moving back into the rotation. And that left the Dodgers going, well, maybe we could trade Tyler Glasnow. Which is ridiculous to think about considering how good Glasnow was for them last year. If they think he's expendable, whoa, you have a team, right? The Mets, they let him walk. Why? Because they signed Devin Williams earlier in the offseason to replace him. We'll see how that turns out, as Devin Williams is a little bit of an older replacement. But losing Diaz combined with losing Alonso to Baltimore has Mets fans understandably livid. As we mentioned, it gets worse. They traded outfielder Brandon Nimmo to the Texas Rangers in exchange for Marcus Semien. Nimmo was a fan favorite. Semien is 35 years old and coming off a down year. But if Semien bounces back, that will take off at least some of the sting there. And so in the span of the week, the Mets lost Alonso, Díaz, and Nimmo, 3 of their most beloved players. Fans are now calling for David Stern's head, accusing him of dismantling the team without a clear plan forward. However, to be fair, Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor, and a ton of money to spend, they could still make some moves that will make this team stronger. But for the Mets, this has been a real ugly week. So, we're winding down here. We've gone our hour, but let's just rapid fire through some other things. Another guy the Blue Jays were linked to, Robert Suarez, signed 3 years, $45 million with the Atlanta Braves. Suarez was the Padres closer, had 40 saves. The Braves needed bullpen help after re-signing Raciel Iglesias, and now they've got a lights-out back end. Kenley Jansen, who was rumored to possibly sign with the Dodgers before the Edwin Díaz thing, he signed 1 year, $11 million with the Tigers. Jansen 37, but still effective. And the Tigers are trying to build something that is special there. They added a closer, which is a really smart move. So this will hopefully lift the Mets a little bit in their spirits. Jorge Polanco, one of the heroes of the Seattle Mariners team, signed a 2-year, $40 million deal with the Mets. And this is the Mets' pivot after losing Pete Alonso. Polanco had a career year in Seattle, and he's 32, but he does have an injury history, so it's a bit of a risky signing. Cedric Mullins signed a 1-year deal with Tampa Bay. As we mentioned, he was traded from Baltimore last year, and the Rays are trying to bet on a bounce back, which is classic Rays. Mike Yastrzemski signed a 2-year, $23 million deal with the Braves. And Josh Naylor, as we reported earlier in the offseason, signed 5 years, $92.5 to stay in Seattle. And the Boston Red Sox acquired Sonny Gray from St. Louis, And Gray is reworking his contract and will make $31 million in 2026. This is big for Boston as they are trying to get back to contention. All right. Was that a lot? That was a lot. The last week or two in sports has been unbelievable. The Blue Jays made some huge splashes this offseason. Quinn Hughes was traded for the first time in his career. The winter meetings had what you would expect at the winter meetings. Pete Alonso, Edwin Díaz, Kyle Schwarber, all finding either new homes or staying home. We're in the middle of one of the most exciting times in sports, just simply with the trades, the signings, the blockbuster deals, and it's all happening right now. So, what do you guys think? Did the Blue Jays overpay for Cease? Will the Wild regret trading for Hughes? If he leaves, should the Mets have kept Alonso or Díaz or both? Let me know what you guys think. Use the hashtag TrueNorthSportsTalk. Leave a comment. Send us a DM, something. We want to hear from you guys. Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you stuck around to get to this far. It was a bit more of a marathon than what we're used to, but there was a lot to talk about. And we covered it all so that y'all know what's going on. Until next time, stay passionate, stay informed, and as our friend Red Green used to say, keep your stick on the ice if you're a hockey puck. If you're a baseball fan, just keep watching with interest. So until next time, we'll see you later.